Video games have to master every single thing they set out to accomplish to be considered true masterpieces. But sometimes a video game might do really well in one particular aspect and just happens to drop the ball on a few others. It can be disappointing to see a game excel at its core mechanics but fumble in areas like world building, narrative, or replayability. The games on this list all have incredible core gameplay loops and, in some cases, even mechanics that marked the height of their respective franchises. Ultimately, though, they dropped the ball elsewhere and managed to disappoint players. This article is inspired by a Reddit thread by user Night Train, so let's tuck right in and you can let me know which ones you agree with. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 video games with excellent gameplay that still disappointed. Number 10, Borderlands 3. It's not often that the third entry in a series is the best, but curiously, plenty of fans credit Borderlands 3 with having the best weapons and gunplay in the entire series. The 2019 action role-playing game from Gearbox Software took advantage of the lessons from its predecessors and impressively refined the gameplay formula. The third entry also has a great selection of classes and interesting characters that elevate the moment-to-moment gameplay loop. Unfortunately, the elements outside of the core mechanics and main characters really let fans down, particularly in the story choices. Players weren't happy about Maya's treatment, the predictable plot with one-note villains, leaving out fan-favorite Vault Hunters with little satisfactory explanation, Ava in general, and its treatment of the Tales from the Borderlands characters. Outside of that, players were not on board with the writing or the comedy, and weren't pleased to see characters like Zero become caricatures of themselves. Feel free to turn down that dialogue volume though, and have a blast with the gunplay, stellar map design, and thrilling boss fights. Number 9, Halo 5 Guardians. If you're a Halo fan, I'm betting that you saw this infamous entry in the FPS franchise coming. The 2015 shooter had multiple games to figure out what fans wanted from its combat mechanics, and it delivers those in spades in Halo 5. The core gameplay loop within the campaign and multiplayer modes consists of arguably the best gunplay in the series. Meanwhile, the janky squad AI and extraordinarily lackluster story that ignored any direction fans actually wanted it to go are a huge detriment to the overall experience. The maps and gameplay types are controversial at best, and while new additions like Warzone did have some fans, it was otherwise pretty universally disliked. Number 8, Fallout 4. Now, Fallout 4 isn't a terrible game by any means, but like many other entries on this list, if it wasn't for its excellent gameplay, it might have been a total swing and a miss. The Fallout series started tremendously strong with its first 2 entries, and even when it did a bit of a genre swap for Fallout 3 and New Vegas, it continued to give fans what they wanted out of an engaging post-apocalyptic RPG romp. Unfortunately, it's all been downhill since then, and while Fallout 4 didn't disappoint in the same way Fallout 76 did, it probably should have been a warning sign. The repeating quests and busy work, while presumably intended to enhance the game length and amount of quests, just frustrated and bored players. As for its story, unfortunately Fallout 4 had these huge shoes to fill and just couldn't manage it. Exploring the world quickly feels like a grind, and the side missions just aren't compelling. This would add up to a game that's pretty tricky to engage with, except that the core gameplay feels great. Shooting is fun, the variety of guns and how they feel to use is excellent, and becoming a wasteland powerhouse is as cool as it's ever been. On the flip side, fans were also bothered that the progression from underdog to fully equipped hero felt way too fast, because of the early appearance of power armor and legendary energy weapons. Fans have said that the combat in this game is the very best of the series, even topping that of Fallout 76. Although you'd be excused if you, like me, played it for about 50 hours and gave it away because you just didn't care anymore. Number 7, Vindictus. If you're not an MMO fan, there's a chance your radar never registered the 2010 MMORPG Vindictus. It's a free-to-play game that offers a variety of classes as set characters. At launch there were 5 and now there are 19. MMORPGs have a ton to juggle at the best of times, but Vindictus has been pretty universally praised for its combat. Players enjoy the fact that every character is unique with their own class that provides a pretty natural re-entry point for returning players to try their hand at each additional new character. While the core gameplay loop has been praised, Vindictus disappointed, largely due to publisher Nexon gating dungeon progression for those that wouldn't put in a ton of time or real-world dollars. Players have bemoaned the mission structure, the lack of support for solo players, and uninspiring story elements. If the combat and large variety of characters does it for you though, this might still be one to check out. Number 6. Mass Effect Andromeda. I'm playing through the Legendary Edition of Mass Effect right now. I've already made it all the way to 3, and while there's a lot of fantastic things about these games, the combat leaves a lot to be desired. Interestingly though, Mass Effect Andromeda fixed that and had excellent combat. Unfortunately, it dropped the ball on just about everything else. The combat and gunplay in Mass Effect is a bit of a crapshoot. It's a dice roll as to whether your Shepard will take cover or try to vault over it. Dodging is slow, and the guns feel incoherently different in every single game, making it annoying to stick to a gun-dependent class when the sniper rifle was awesome in the first game and awful in the second. Now, apparently the sniper rifle actually sucks in Mass Effect Andromeda too, but on the whole, that game really got its movement and combat mechanics right. The gunplay and traversal is night and day better than the original trilogy. Andromeda's Nomad vehicle is actually enjoyable to drive, the moment-to-moment combat is fluid and responsive, the game gives you a jetpack, and lets you attack with clever combos, which add a whole other element to combat encounters. Unfortunately, Andromeda dropped the ball on everything the original trilogy nailed. Its story wasn't exciting, the characters paled in comparison to their counterparts in Mass Effect 1 to 3, and the writing was largely weak. That said, if they managed to combine the gameplay from Andromeda with everything else from the original trilogy, we are in for a hell of a future Mass Effect game. Number 5. Destiny. This might be a controversial one, but Destiny was a game that largely launched without its story or lore accessible within the experience. Bungie knew they were pushing gameplay to the forefront, and everything else was an afterthought. That said, the gameplay and movement mechanics in Destiny are almost without comparison. They're so very good that plenty of players were happy to overlook the story concerns when the game launched, and it's the reason they keep coming back. Destiny is a great example of a game that succeeded so comprehensively with its gameplay loop that its missteps elsewhere don't really matter. Every gun feels unique, the sights, sounds, and feedback of combat encounters are consistently satisfying, almost to the point that Destiny is in a class of its own in the first-person shooter genre. That said, the constant grind, lack of engaging social elements, unsatisfying additional content, aggressive monetization, and uninteresting narrative left plenty of players wanting. While plenty of players said they decided to give the game away as it started to feel like crossing off chores, many more just keep coming back because there aren't that many games that make gunplay feel this good. Number 4. Rage 2. It should come as no great surprise that the collaboration between Avalanche Studios and id Software created an FPS with phenomenal gameplay. It's perfectly controlled chaos set in a wildly saturated open world. Gunplay is delightfully fast-paced, and chaining clever kills alongside tactical choices of which powers to use and when is a blast. Then there's the monotonous open world that just begins to feel like a grind to explore, and the characters you can meet, who you will meet and then wish you hadn't because they are flat and boring as hell. The world is a little too big for its own good, and though the core gameplay is exciting, there's not much to be excited about outside of it. Yet another example of a game that would have been a slam dunk if the rest of the game was anything like its core mechanics. Number 3. Dragon's Dogma. 2012 action RPG Dragon's Dogma does an excellent job of its party-based combat mechanics. The core gameplay loop succeeds on the back of combat encounters that feel substantial and flexible, a variety of ways to engage, and weighty hand-to-hand engagements. As a result, the game's had a substantial cult following despite its shortcomings, which come in the form of its weak narrative and unsatisfying story beats. The biggest problem is the way the game feels blatantly unfinished, especially in terms of its plot threads, many of which don't really go anywhere. For some people, those frayed ends and chaotic components worked, but for the majority, it was a bit of a letdown. Luckily, everyone could agree that the central mechanics absolutely nailed it. If the rumored sequel brushed up on the surrounding systems and narrative, it'd make for an incredible RPG. Number 2. The Surge 2. If you haven't played The Surge 2, I have to commit a cardinal sin by telling you it has Souls-esque combat. As much as that may be a cliche, it is true in this case in terms of the game's style and the quality of its gameplay mechanics. The 2019 offering from Deck 13 Interactive has been praised for its varied and refined approaches to combat, with stamina mechanics that demand strategy and a genuine heft to its mechanics. Players reported the gameplay being so good that it carried them through the whole experience, even though the game world felt washed out and empty with a bland setting and average voice acting for its characters. The monotonous environments and simple story may have been a sticking point, but the joy of its varied and tactically demanding combat kept plenty of people hooked. Number 1. Anthem. Anthem was such an infamously problematic game that a lot of people forgot that its gameplay was actually really solid. I say was, given that the game was lambasted so thoroughly that even the reboot that was planned from EA to actually address all of these issues and present the original vision of the game was scrapped. Similar to the case of Fallout 4, this is a game with such pedigree in its developer and publisher that it seemed fated to succeed. You could argue that with such anticipation from players, it could never live up to the hype, but Anthem still stumbled more than you'd expect. That's not to say it stumbles at the first hurdle. Your first experience, choosing your playstyle, flying through the gorgeous game world, playing with your abilities, engaging in the unique combat experience, and checking out the gunplay is fantastic. In fact, it's so fantastic you assume there has to be a really wonderful game under there somewhere. Unfortunately, that's pretty much all the game has going for it. Beyond the core gameplay mechanics, the mission structure was highly repetitive and unengaging, and the story was lackluster at best. On top of that, loot progression wasn't even satisfying, enemy AI needed serious work, and the entire experience felt unfinished and half-baked. Anthem is a blast to fight in, and it's a joy to get around the game world. It's just a shame there's not really anything worth seeing in it. And that's our list. Do let me know down in that comments section if you can think of any other games that have excellent gameplay but still manage to disappoint you. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm @JessMcDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more gaming goodness.